we started off actually working in the garden, um, repairing and painting motor cars. Well, at least I only painted one in the garden. It was really, and I realized then it was impossible to do what I was trying to do. So we got a little workshop in 5 Street, Jameson Avenue, and Mr. Esat was our landlord, an Indian fellow, but very, very switched on. He charged us a rental of, say, £10 a month, and then every couple of months, the rent would go up by a certain amount. And until it got really out of hand, the rent was expanding. It was very much like the horses' um, nails in a horseshoe and the farrier, that story. But so then we moved from Jameson Street to 5 Street, where we got a very nice little workshop. It was very, very nice for a start. And we had Mrs. Winterbourne was our next door neighbour, and Paul used to go in and see her across there wearing his little overalls. It was so funny to see them. And our next door neighbour there also was Harold Edwards, and he had Dormer diesels, and he was the engineer that fitted the engines at the power station in Jersey here with the Merleys. From there, we bought our first property, which was further down the road, down 5 Street Extension. And that was very, very fortunate to get a hold of that particular property. Arthur Jackson was in that particular property before us. But during that time, we were manufacturing motor car radiators, and we were making the cores. We got all the equipment for both cellular and tubular radiators. And it was really, the firm grew like topsy. And the last plot we were on, where we ultimately stayed, was half an acre. And we built sheds as we went along, and they were only sheds. And then we'd build over the top of proper building. But that property, we were on an aquifer, which was rather remarkable, in that we got water at about 6 feet. So when we put foundations down, and the trouble was the plot was clay, and when we had to put foundations down at all, we had to put pads. And because we had to put pads, we had to pump out the water at 6 feet. We were flooding. So, and even that was in the dry season. So we were very, very fortunate. And the property, all our property is on an aquifer. And even the city of Bulawayo, they draw water from just, I think it's Bristol Road. They pump water there for the city as well. Then we did all sorts of things. Radiator and Tinning was a marvellous firm, actually. It was absolutely fantastic. It got we grew and grew and grew. We grew a bit like Topsy. Trevor was a type of individual that when a market slipped away from us, we developed into anything else that needed to be done within the country. We did it. And so we created different departments. And we started off, it was with just repairing motor radiators, then, manufacturing. But of course, we needed the top and bottom tanks, so we ended up with metal pressings, and that became the sheet metal department. And but then everything grew like topsy. We got at least half a dozen 40-ton power presses, at least half a dozen of those. And we got the 2 dual form, well, in fact, we had 3 dual form presses. And I worked in the development with Jack Lawrence of Leicester. And he started off making this dual form press, but he made it too small, and it wouldn't be big enough for doing a Chevrolet top tank. And I mentioned this to him, and he altered the size of his machinery and all his prototypes to take in the dimensions that I said. And for that reason, he actually sold me a press, one of the original radiator presses. In fact, it's radiator press number 2 or number 1 of the big size. And that had dualite in the tank, which you cast your dyes in. Now that metal was a bismuth alloy. Now in each one of those presses, there was at least maybe 250 kgs of dualite in them, and dualite would be worth about £10 a kilo, or £10 a pound, I should say. So those presses, as scrap, were worth a fortune in real terms. And there were 3 of them, and the 2 later ones I bought were the ones that could do jerry cans and things like that. And we produced hundreds and hundreds of jerry cans for the army, for the Portuguese in Angola, well, for everywhere we sold jerry cans. They weren't as good as the quite as good. The welds were difficult to do from our point of view, joining the 2 sides together. And it could have been improved a lot. In fact, today, that would have been all automated. The sheet metal department in Radiator and Tinning was very, very good. We had a Pull Max nibbler, and we had an 8-foot guillotine, and a 4-foot guillotine. We had rolls, and we had so much equipment. And we had Promicam presses, for folders. We had, I think, 2 of those Promicams. They were beautiful machines, really, because you could put individual dies in there if you were making boxes or anything, and the tool would fit inside the box. But everything was wonderful. We also had in that department automatic feeders onto the presses, which would then, the strip would be fed with the air-operated feeders, and it would crop off, or what the tooling was in there. And we used to make earthing strip. That was one of those, where you used automatic feed on that. It was very, very good for that. But we had so many products that I couldn't even start to tell you of our main lines, because there were so many, and they were all so important to us. One of the things that I failed to do was to really go out and sell products. I should have made more. We made hundreds and hundreds of toolboxes. And now we had a wonderful chap working for us called Gotti Kunzi. And Gotti, Gottfried, he was a Swiss chap, and he'd worked at Crost down in South Africa, and he was one of their production managers. And he developed all the scheme and the manufacturing theory of it. Now, I didn't have close enough contact with Gotti because his office was right at the back of the works, and he was really a fabulous man when I look back on the capabilities of individuals. We had some wonderful people. We had one of our first foremen was, I'll remember it in a minute, but we had my African people were wonderful too. I had Philemon and Dooley, Abednego, Stephen. All these people had skills of their own, and they were quite, when I look back, each one had got a capability which was hard to replace if you lost them. It was like the chap on the turret press. He could do 58, 60, nearly 60 strokes a minute on the turret presses. Absolutely fabulous. As good as automation. The way he worked his hands and his feet, it all worked out so wonderfully well, these particular individuals. Then we had a chap called Fire. He died rather early in life, but he was the yard foreman. He was very, very good. And then Jeffius Moyo, he was a trade unionist, wonderful person too, really, when I look back. His knowledge of the trade laws and advising the workers' committee, and he was another very, very clever, really, when I look back. And it was a wonderful firm for people. We had even had a little hospital there where Heather worked, and there were two assistants in there, and she used to prescribe pills, and she was able to do that she was a nurse, a professional nurse, and she got permission to order certain drugs up to a certain degree, and she looked after all the staff there. There was a staff there ultimately of 550 people, and I couldn't remember all their names. In fact, it was very difficult. I knew most of them by sight, because one of the things that I always did was I always had a theory that a farmer's shoe leather is the best fertilizer that a farmer can have. And I used to walk my workshop all the way, all around, and I'd do it twice a day, not at regular times. And if I saw a chap that was sweeping the shop floor with just the head of a broom with no bristles in it, I would immediately take him to the stores and give him another broom. I interfered a lot with the staffing, which was very naughty of me when I look back, instead of going through the proper channels. These were, when you're a self-propelled person, one's inclined to do that sort of thing. But you should work through a system. I had Pen Owen. Pen Owen was a very, very strict disciplinarian. He was a squadron leader in the Air Force, and in the Royal Air Force. But he was sometimes over strict, and he did things, and he would catch people out, which would really, I thought was very naughty of him, what he used to do sometimes. I didn't agree completely with his tactics. But he ran also the Metal Merchants Association in Harare or Salisbury in that time. And the Metal Merchants Association was a fabulous organization because it tried to keep the scrap metal within the country. And scrap metal is really the lifeblood of industry. Now, when later in time, the Metal Merchants Association, I think, had lost control due to government policies, and there was all a scrap. Anything that could be turned into scrap was scrapped, and exported out of Zimbabwe. And that was to the disaster of the country as far as I'm concerned, because it not only was it me, but there was a company called Issels. They needed steel. There was All Metal Founders. They needed iron and steel. All those people needed scrap metal. And if it was within the country, they would actually produce the goods that the country needed. And it was marvelous. We also, we had a little bit of aluminium in the firm, but that was kept completely separate, because aluminium in a copper and brass firm is a complete no-no, because you get one flick of aluminium in a brass product and you get a form of corrosion takes place, and that is very dangerous to your products. But we got a very big, one of the big things we had in Radiator and Tinning was metal recovery. And because we had so many furnaces, we had 10 furnaces at least working, and we ended up with a lot of dross. And because the dross is all got metal in the dross, that we used to have a big ball mill that was 8-foot diameter by about 4 or 5 foot wide, running on rollers, and shall we say, a couple of ton of balls in there, which were 3-inch diameter, and that would break up all the drosses into powders, and the solid metal would come out. There was water flowing through it, so the water would carry the metal out of the unit, and we then dry the powders, and we'd export those. We used to export them to London. We don't know where they went, actually, but a friend of mine, Jewish chap in London, used to buy all our stuff, and I think it all went to, we used to export, say, 3 or 4 containers at a time, and it was very, very good. We got a good return on there, because we also paid for a firm of analysts who would analyze the material, and if there was 28% copper, we would get paid for 28% copper in that ash, or whatever the percentages were, and we get paid for zinc and that, and they would take out all the impurities. But the powders were as fine as talc powder in those days, and it was dusty. And when it was funny that the liquidator, she said, your place was bloody filthy. She said, I had to move tons and tons of that. And I said, yes, madam, that the ash was worth £100,000. And I wasn't joking. That was one of the big things. The other thing is that in Radiator and Tinning, we had miles and miles of electric cable, all underground. And all that was copper. When you realize how big Radiator and Tinning was, it covered nearly 8 acres. And so the amount of electric cables we got, and transformers, we got 2 very big 500 kilowatt, they were 500 kVA and 500 volts. So they were special for the electric motors I've got from the Zambezi sugar estates. They were beautiful motors too. But all the equipment we got, we'd also got billet scalping machines. They looked oily and dirty, but that was because you had to use a lot of lubricant when you were doing these sort of jobs. And to a person with the wrong eyes wouldn't understand what was dirty. Was the way things were. It wasn't dirty. It was full of oil everywhere. sort of style for scalping. And the scalping, what we got was not only the scalping, we got a double-ended drilling machine because when we had billets, we had to drill through the billet for making tube. So what we got was two drilling heads with inch and a half or could have been 2-inch drills on each one. And the one drill would drill through a little bit more than halfway through the billet and then come back. And then the other drill would come in from the other side because the billet was cramped in the middle. Now, these were very special machines. Those machines should have really gone to United Spring and Forging. They would have, and all the burners from the furnaces, all those should have gone to firms like United Spring. United Spring today, if Gordon Dakin had been alive at that time, I think things would have been a lot different when it was all sold up. We'd also got draw benches, which I'd made with Caterpillar chains. The Caterpillar track itself, I would take off the plates from the Caterpillar and use those big chains. Then I'd also got smaller chains for doing the lighter work, but heavy duty chains, same chains as they use at the sugar estates at Hippo Valley. They were, and some of the draw benches, I got them 120 feet long, 75 feet long, and they got big gearboxes on them, beautiful gearboxes. Those gearboxes were worth thousands of dollars each. Even the scrap merchants must have had a birthday because the gear wheel inside the gearbox was beautiful PB1 bronze, and they must have weighed something like 200 or 300 kilos each. The gears inside those gearboxes, and all of the electric motors that were driving all these different things, they were huge. Do you know, I had so much fun making machinery. Oh, what a foolish man I've been. The other thing then, I bought from the railways a wheel lathe, and it was for, this particular lathe was for getting the pair of railway wheels, the big railway wheels, and they would go between centres. So you can imagine how big the lathe was, because the wheels on the railway carriages and that would be, say, 5 or 6 feet diameter. So the chuck on the end. And what I did, I put a drum on there, and for drawing tube in longer lengths, so that we ended up with a very big bull blocks. And this, in fact, we got two heads on that machine. We got, one was a 36-inch and the other one was 84-inch drum, where if you did one circle of the drum, you got 8 foot, 24 foot of tube in a coil. And we got around the machine, we got conveyors taking the tube around. It was wonderful to see what we were doing there. But of course, at that time, the country, we were supplying the copper tube for the country, but it wasn't much that we supplied much, shall we say, to Zambia or adjoining countries. But it was the bronzes that sold the best throughout the world. We had markets in Australia, South America, North America, and we sold container load after container load of metals. We also kept a store, which was really, my lack of accounting knowledge was really a disaster for me, running branches. I should have had more tighter control over the bronzes and that, because I'm sure there was a lot of theft um, um, along the line on the metals there. We eventually sold up our Birmingham branch and or closed it, would be a better way. And we had Leslie's Radiators down in South Africa as well, and we had Radiators Botswana. That was run by Sham Shekaram, and I still keep in touch with Sham these days. And and the other people that we had was John Swanepoel, absolutely marvelous engineer, and Alistair Smith, and great chap too. All these chaps, each individual, and they worked. The firm was split up in so many departments, and each department head ran his own shop. Really, John Swanepoel ran the maintenance workshops, and there was Piero Kunz, who was a very, very good Piero and Kunz, and there was Gotti Kunzi, so don't get them mixed up. But Piero was a brilliant engineer, and I bought a press, a Fielding and Platt press, 1450 tonner vertical press from Circ Radiators or Circ Tubes in Birmingham, and that press I had to dismantle, and I gave the job to a cousin of mine to do, and I think it affected him health-wise doing that job, and I feel a little bit guilty on that. But there was a river alongside Circ Tubes, and to get that press across that river bed, it was a brick-bottomed bed. The river was brick-bottomed, and we had to get this press, and it must have weighed 60 to 100 tons, or it was huge. And it wasn't, the main castings were all in one. You couldn't split it all up, not as much as, but we also got all the dies from there. They were all high-grade steel, and for that particular press, and that must have weighed, filled a container, at least 20 ton of dies. Now all those dies ended up in Bulawayo, and they were high-grade tool steel, which nickel-based, nickel and chrome, and we had thousands of nibs in our stores. Now those were wire drawing dies, and that's another thing. I bought 3 wire drawing machines from Radar, I think it was. Radar, huge ones. They were made of 1-inch plate, or even thicker than that possibly, but they were vertical drop-off drums, and we didn't use those as much as what we did. We'd also got an annealing plant there for annealing brass, which was quite a thing. It was 2 chambers in what you had the hood, then you had the heating hood over the top, and that must have taken about 100 kilowatt of power to heat that up to anneal the brass coils into what you call interstage annealing. You know, you do a certain amount of rolling, then you would anneal and then do it. But all these things, these pieces of plant, when they advertised Radiator and Tinning, the liquidator, they advertised some containers that we got in the workshop. They advertised we got 250 kilogram scales, And the main equipment in the place was not advertised at all. And when I look back, I just I shouldn't ever look back, because it's history, and also the times were different. Everything was different in that particular era of time. It just, one can't visualize how difficult it was to trade, because there was no currency there, and you had to apply for currency. Now, that comes up to a point where I had very good relations with the ministry, even in the Smith government. I had very, very good relations with government. And then when the Mugabe government, I'd also got very, very good relationships. But what they did, and I thought was, and I've got the documents here in Jersey, they actually asked me, one of the chaps, in talking to each other, said, "I've got a friend who needs a job. Any chance of giving him a job?" Well, I'm trying to keep in with government, So I gave this particular job. I gave this particular individual a job. But he was actually a spy on behalf of government, employed by government, to come and work at Radiator and Tinning and write reports about what was going on there, because I was applying for currency, and they wanted to know what I wanted to do with the currency, for metal and that. And for getting zinc from Zambia, because zinc is a main, it's 40% of brass in most cases, or 30% in other cases, 70-30 or 60-40. And one of the things I did, this is really a joke, but it's really a part of history. And this came out on television. I went down, we'd opened a factory down in Botswana. Now, Botswana has copper mines down there, and I bought cathodes that were coming, that was Botswana metal. And so brass being 70%, copper being 70%, I applied to import zinc and to produce billets down in Botswana. Now let me get this straight. What I was doing, because the copper was 70%, now in the Convention of Customs, you have to have 30% local content to be able to export it. You must have 30% local content. Now, what happened was I wanted to import zinc and make the billets they became a Botswana product because it got the 70% copper. Well, it ended up the president of Botswana and the president of Zimbabwe ended up having an argument over whose copper it was. And what it turned out to be is that copper went to Eiffel Flats from Botswana, and they converted the copper raw material into cathodes. And then because Eiffel Flats, they considered that then a Zimbabwe product. So it got very, very complicated when you've got two presidents arguing over my product, where I was trying to produce brass billets, either in Botswana or in Zimbabwe. But it was one of my, really, I suppose, a fiddle of mine to try and get that working. But all the things that I did to make a success of the company. Really, I was like a snake. I would, if I couldn't get over it, I got under it. If I got round it, well, left or right, it was. I got over most of my problems, and fortunately for me, the the government were on my side in 90% of the cases. The other one was aluminium industries wanted to go into the copper business. Well, there's always been an understanding in South Africa between McKechnie's and Alman down south. A very big copper aluminium people in Pietermaritzburg, beautiful company, and they'd got a place in Harare called Alman. Well, Alman wanted to come and come into my business, and the government, Dave Moss and of the government, and David, somebody else, I've forgotten his name now, and it turned out they were on my side, and because there'd always been this unwritten thing in South Africa that aluminium people in Pietermaritzburg and McKechnie's, they'd never go into each other's business, and we tried to, and that's what we did in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. And so that's how I ended up in the extrusion of brass rod and all that. We got two very big presses. One was the Fielding and Platt, the vertical one, which we did copper tube underwater and run the tube down and through a trough, which was about at least 70 to 80 feet long. And so if you don't extrude underwater, what happens, you get oxides formed on the tube, and when it goes underwater you end up with a bright tube, and you don't have to use acids to clean it or anything like that. We never really produced a refrigeration tube because of the cleanliness. You had to use a special lubricant which left no scale inside the tube, and when you're drawing tube, because on the draw benches we had all pointing machines. That means for pointing the tube before it goes through the die, and then it's gripped with the gripper, and the gripper pulls it for 60 feet or whatever the length of the draw bench was. And we used to start with 1 3/4 diameter by 1.5 tube, and that we started pulling that down. It was wonderful to see. We did a lot of condenser tube. The biggest radiator we produced in Radiator and Tinning was for Kariba Power Station. Now that was the full width of the where the motor room of Kariba is huge, and it must be at least 100 feet wide, or 150 feet wide, that generator. And we built a radiator, went right across, and it was 24 foot high, and it was in 2 banks high, and the full width. It was the biggest single job we ever did as a radiator. Now that was on, that was another speciality we got, was spiral wound tube. And I'd got 2 or 3 machines there that did the spiral wound tube. And we had strips of copper, radiator copper, which we would wind the machine. We'd make these machines ourselves, well, some of them, and the others I'd bought. And those actually spun the tube around, and took corrugated the fin and wrapped it round, and we put a gas torch on that, and so with a string solder, and sweated the fin to the tube. Really, when I think back of all these different things that we did, and we got, see, that was all John Swanepoel's department, and then we had the tool room, which was again separate to the maintenance shop. Now the tool room was, we'd got bridge ports. We got about 3 bridge ports. We got a dirty great a milling machine. Gee, it was a big one. I don't even remember the name of it. It was, I think I bought it from the railways, that one. But I bought from Jersey about 5 container loads of machinery and took them into Zimbabwe. And they all came from Rediffusion and here in Jersey. And beautiful machines that Minty, who was my maths workshop technology master, he was the manager of that company. And I bought all that equipment. And it's quite funny. I didn't realize at the time that Rediffusion and Swift Transport in Zimbabwe were basically the same. They got the same holding company. So I could have got more machinery. They got a lot of other types of machinery, but it was just as well I didn't. It would have been, I would have needed more space and that. But talking, I loved the people were lovely that I worked with. Everybody. When I think of, there was Market, Moyo, poor old Market, and as you say, Jeremy, a lot of them have died early in life because of the lifespan of the African people is lower than but it's when I think of them, I must admit that when I go to church on a Sunday, I always think of them, all of them, and their trials and tribulations that they must go through in this troubled times that they've got. But hopefully one day it'll all come right. God only knows when. But it was a period of time when I went out to Africa in 1953. People were very, very primitive. And I have to be careful what I say because today it would be considered wrong, but it's fact that time, that cycle of time is so different. Every year made a difference. The people grew and grew and improved and everything. When in 1980 and 2000, when I left, the people were so well off, really, and things have gone so bad for them that one could cry. And I do, but the skills, see, what happened? People were so skilled in Zimbabwe that they've all left the country. A lot of them have left the country and they've gone all over the world, all their skills. You only got to take Alistair working in New Zealand and in a very senior position. And very proud of his success. And there's so many of others that have gone through Radiator and Tinning and they've been successful, but not necessarily in Zimbabwe. They've gone all over the world. And I wish I knew their successes. It would have been lovely to have written about their successes rather than our own. But when I think back, you know, we bought properties. First of all, we bought the first one for £4,000. The one of Arthur Jackson's where he was in, and then we bought, I think it was Ward's Transport, which diagonally along was part of Ward's Transport. There was a stonemason there years ago, and there was a stone there which somebody had painted on. Here lies the so and so, and the person that it referred to was a chap who worked for Ward's Transport. I can still see him, but I can't remember his name now, and I can't remember what was written on the stone. It was his name. It was a big slab of stone. What we did we for all electricity, we actually dug trenches. Well, they were all concrete trenches, if you know what I mean. In the road, we'd got all concrete, but we left trenches everywhere so we could put electric cables, water pipes, and everything down underground. Now, I dare say, some scrap merchant just pinched all those plates because they were all covered in. If it wasn't quarter plate, it would have been 3/8 plate. All the way along these, they would have been 12 inches wide, and they sat on ridges. We also made all our own gases with carbide generators. We got site feed generators. Now, these site feed generators were something that my dad had in Jersey, and I managed to get these. Where I got them from originally, I don't know, but I'd got at least 4 of them, and carbide was a very messy business, and because you always got the sludge. And with the site feed generator, it had the canister above, and the carbide was in the form of sugar, and that was supplied to us by a firm called AE&CI. African Explosives and Chemical Industries. And they kept it in stock for us, that material. And we went through that because we piped all our own gas through to all the blowpipes. We must have had something like 20 or 30 gas blowpipes working all off those generators. And so we got specialists running the generator, the carbide side. Now, fortunately, I don't think we ever had an explosion with the carbide. And normally, carbide could be dangerous, especially if you're using lump carbide and where you're dropping water onto the carbide. But these site feeds used to drop and automatically close off the valve with the pressure inside the vessel would close off the valve, and no more carbide would drop into the water. So they were fabulous and very, very safe. We'd also got spark eroders. I'd got 2 spark eroders, beautiful spark eroders, Swiss ones, and all that was part of the tool room actually. We got a specialist in there. And that was another thing. Now we got a laboratory, where we'd got none of this stuff was ever advertised. And it was an ARL spectrophotometer. Now that was a beautiful machine too, and we could analyze copper alloys, brasses, and that. And you couldn't do lead so much. Leads were inclined to smudge. But with the sparking, we had 2 different systems in the laboratory. One was the wet laboratory, where you use lamps and you measured the colors of the spectrum. and that was a different type. That was what you called wet analysis. Whereas the other one, we used a pellet, about inch diameter, machined and polished, and then you'd spark it, and the machine would actually measure the colours of the spectrum in that. It was a computer machine. That must have been worth a lot of money. I dare say we're talking about 20 or 30,000 I paid for that particular machine. Would have paid a lot of money for that. And then I also bought from Birmingham a continuous casting plant, complete, twin there, complete with all the electrics and everything. We never really got that going. That should have gone to Colonel Dubie at Zimbabwe Defence Industries. They would have made use of that and done it profitably. But then again, they closed up, and I think they're trying to restart it again. It's a shame that things didn't pan out quite for everybody in industry. But I see Gordon Dakin's son is still at United Spring. He's been there, well, virtually all his life, because Gordon was a great friend of mine. And Gordon was an individual that bought and sold machinery, and he worked in conjunction with the Halstead brothers. And he went down to South Africa, and he went into a particular factory to see what he bought. He went in on a Monday morning, and he ended up being kicked by the guard dog. The guard dog happened to be an ostrich, and it kicked him. Unfortunately, Gordon died within 9 months of that accident happening to him. But when he came in to the office and told me what had happened to him, I must admit I just burst out laughing, because only that could have happened to Gordon. And Gordon and I, we went to London together, and we went to a theatre, and one of these, Lenny O'Henry, I think his name is, a comedian, and it was in the early days of African comedians, being on, and he pointed at the audience. He says, "You don't shut up," he says. "I'll come and live next door to you." And Gordon was jumping up and down in his seat. He was a very excitable chap. But he was, I don't know if he was Jewish or not, but we went to a special place in Soho for a special sandwich, a beef sandwich, and a beef roll sort of thing. It was a Jewish sort of thing. And we spent the evening together. We must have been to an auction or something, I don't know. Over the years, we went out together a lot. But these are all wonderful people that were in Bulawayo, and they were the people that helped to make Bulawayo. There was Essels, who used to make all the railway wheels and all those sort of things. And the axles they used to make. Now, the railway workshops in Bulawayo were beautiful, huge shops. And when they had steam locos, most of the skilled people in Bulawayo were ex-railway people, and they were highly skilled. There was coach builders, every type of trade was employed at the railways. And the Railway Museum in Bulawayo is one of those places that all tourists should really go and see, because they've got the original trains from the years gone by, and the locomotives are still there. But they scrapped all the locos, all the steam locos, and they went over to the diesels and electrics. I did the first 20 some odd miles of catenary between Gwello and the junction there that's outside Gwello. I did the original cable there, catenary. And they did that on that big bull block of mine. We had the special die made. It was like an acorn shape. And we could have done that job quite comfortably. But Rhodesia Cables got that job eventually. But they didn't do it. It was imported from England, which took... the country needs to support itself by its own goods, and that applies right now throughout the world. We've got to buy our own things, because right at the moment with this terrible virus that's going on throughout the world, we've got something. Industry has taken such a pounding. Everything's taken a pounding with this virus, and it's really something that is going to take a lot of getting over. I mean, when you think Paul has had 102 days in hospital and only just learning to walk and that, it's a miracle he's come out of this alive. And when the ambulance driver took him home to Sue's house, she was in tears. She said he was the only person that she'd taken home alive, and doesn't that tell a story in itself? It's a disaster that's happening throughout the world, and we all have to try and watch and be careful. We have to be very, very careful where we go. Well, I mean, I was supposed to pick up my pills today from the chemist, but Debs didn't want me to go to the chemist, so I've asked them to deliver them, so that they'll deliver them tomorrow. But that's how important it is not to make contact with too many people, especially if you're in the 80s or 90s. Hopefully Paul is going to get married at St. Nicholas Church at the end of August. And that'll be my 90th birthday. And hopefully we will have a joint wedding ceremony and a 90th birthday, and we'll get the family all together. And hopefully all of us will join up. That's about most of what I can say. But for the future of young people, they are going to have to really study hard, get a lot of knowledge, and the IT seems to be where the future lays. And if it's in engineering, it's going to be in all these automated machinery that you see. People are going to have to think differently to what I used to think. I used to think in a small way, and I tried to do everything myself, which was so stupid of me. Mind you, we were very successful, and I'm very proud of the success of all the people that work for us. All of them. Each one had even the chap who worked on the spiral fin machine, they were specialists in their own little field. They were all specialists. What's his name, who worked on the dual forms? I mean, these people, they really were fabulous. All of them were fabulous. We'd also got, I got a shoe mag, only it's a small one. It was a bit small, but that was an automatic decoil, straighten and cut to length line, all in one machine, cut to length, polish the product as well. Beautiful. It was an old machine, but it's a machine that people like the wire people, I don't know, those in Kwekwe. But no, I think a lot of the machinery that I had was very specialized. And I'd got 2 or 3 cut to length lines. One was for wires. I'd also got spring maker machinery, all sorts of things that we got, that we developed over the years. We were making mats for these mats was made of a spring, and they were on a wire that went inside a filter cloth, and these filters they were used in the flour industry, and all sorts of industries used these filters. I don't know who our customer was for those filters, but we made these filter frames for those filters. I can't remember who it was, but we made thousands and thousands of feet of that spiral spring, all interlocked inside them. The envelopes for those were about 4 foot wide by 6 foot deep, or maybe a bit more, but quite big filters. They'd use them in the cement industry. They would use them everywhere where they used that. We also had filter units ourselves for filtering carbide, the sludge, so that we put the sludge in and it would settling, a form of settling. Then we'd sell that. The people used to come and buy that for whitewash. For doing, the city council would take it off us for doing if they were doing a football pitch, for doing the lines and all that. They would do all sorts of things with our carbide sludge. Yeah, all these different sections that I think of. Now, our stores was a half an acre of stores. And in that, the Japanese have a term, what is just in time. Now, in Zimbabwe or Rhodesia, we had to have a different system altogether. It was just in case, JIC, just in case we had a machine breakdown. And in that stores, I had hundreds of electric motors, water pumps, all sorts of things. I even had the biggest motor I had in there was about 150 horsepower. It had a water pump on it at one time. And when I think of it, all the stuff that we had in that place, crumbs. I love the place. I mean, foolish. And all our rock stocks of bronze were in there. We had every size of bronze, the hollows, and hollows and solids and rods and all sorts, and then brass rod. We used to supply city bolts with all their brass for turning, for making electrical fittings, all the glands and all that was all made by us. We made all the forging brass for alloy die cast. They made all the Critical Hope window fittings with all our brass. We did the stays, all of the Critical Hope windows, brasses on them, pig stays, everything. All that material was from us. It really was fantastic when I think back. And it's a pride that I had. It's just such a shame that Zimbabwe, if Robert had only taken the advice of those twins, and not necessarily him, the British government. These people, the politicians, they wanted to get rid of everything, and things could have, if only the farms had been sold to the government, and then they distributed that in 1980, things would have been so different. But that was those twin brothers, the ranchers. I've forgotten, I've mentioned them earlier, and I've forgotten their names now again. But no, I just hope all my grandchildren find their niches, and because it's going to be hard. And I mean, Nick is a good mathematician by the sound of it. He's teaching other people, wonderful. And teaching is a wonderful ability. I mean, Hannah is teaching, and she enjoys that. Stephen, he's doing his mining operation, and I look at the mines in Australia, and they're so huge when I see it. That Palbora, or whatever it is, right to the north, I've never seen such great big excavations. When you see it, unbelievable the size. And the railway, the road transport to manoeuvre all that to the ports. I think it all goes to Port Harcourt or somewhere like that to being shipped away to China. Yeah, it's wonderful what the kids, the advantages they've got. Jonathan wants to go into aeronautical sort of sciences, and just hope he'll do well there. But of course, one of the problems there is a lot of the workers in America, and Americans won't allow non-born people to work in their industries, aeronautical industries, these rocket sciences and that. They have to be American. And that's what's happening to Andre's boys. Andre Lagouba, they can't get in what they want to do. They can't get into because they were born in Guernsey, and that's one of their disadvantages. Yeah, but it's wonderful. I think things will be so different, and people like myself can't imagine which way it'll go. And you get chaps like Musk, who developed the Tesla car. It's really, we need people to think big like that, and take people along with them.